In the early days of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United States stood united in support of the besieged nation. Both Republican and Democratic leaders championed aid packages, emphasizing the importance of defending democracy and countering Russian aggression. Senator Lindsey Graham, a staunch Republican, remarked that aiding Ukraine was essential to prevent further invasions by Russia or China, framing it as a pivotal moment for global freedom.
They're on track to break the Russian army. And the only way they could possibly lose is if we pull the plug on them.
The wreckage of Russia's war machine was on display for Ukraine's Independence Day celebrations, even as almost a fifth of the country remains under occupation.
People ask me, is it worth it? Here's what we've gotten for our investment. We haven't lost one soldier. We've reduced the combat power of the Russian army by 50%, and not one of us has died in that endeavor. This is a great deal for America.
You've previously said that it's the best money we've ever spent. That's still true?
Since we helped Churchill stand up to the Nazis.
However, as the conflict endured, a noticeable shift occurred within conservative circles. By the fall of 2023, Republican lawmakers, commentators, and voters exhibited increasing reluctance to continue military and financial support for Ukraine.
But he was terrible at Munich, Zelensky, and I think he has made it almost impossible to sell to the American people that he's a good investment. He either needs to resign and send somebody over that we can do business with.
A Pew Research Center survey from February 2025 revealed that 47% of Republicans felt the U.S. was providing too much assistance to Ukraine, a significant rise from previous years. This shift was further exacerbated by President Donald Trump's administration. In February 2025, a highly publicized clash between Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and President Zelensky underscored the growing strain on U.S.-Ukraine relations. Trump's administration began to prioritize economic concessions, such as demanding preferential access to Ukraine's mineral resources over unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty. What was meant to be a high-stakes diplomatic meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky quickly descended into chaos. Initially, Trump framed the meeting as a moment of internal cooperation, touting his supposed ability to make deals and end the war in Ukraine. But as the conversation unfolded, it became clear that his tone was less about finding common ground and more about grandstanding for political leverage. The tensions escalated rapidly as Trump began dismissing Zelensky's earnest concerns. At one point, he interrupted the Ukrainian president with dismissive remarks, accusing him of failing to show enough gratitude for U.S. support, despite the billions of dollars in aid already sent.
You said thank you once this
a
entire
lot of
meeting?
times.
No, in this
Even
entire meeting,
today.
have you said thank
Even
you?
today.
You went to Pennsylvania and campaigned for the opposition in October. Offer some words of appreciation for the United States of America and the president who's trying to save your country.
Please, you think that if you will speak very loudly about the war, you
He's
can...
not speaking loudly.
This ideological rift has led to a spectrum of opinions amongst conservatives. Figures like Senator Roger Wicker have remained steadfast in supporting Ukraine, emphasizing the moral imperative of opposing Russian aggression. Conversely, leaders such as House Speaker Mike Johnson have adopted a more cautious approach, linking continued aid to stringent border security measures, reflecting the party's internal debates. This internal conflict highlights a broader ideological battle between traditional conservative hawks and a rising isolationist faction. The shift in Republican leadership's stance on Ukraine is undeniable. Once a party that strongly advocated for global democracy and resisting Russian aggression, today the GOP is increasingly divided on whether continued U.S. support for Ukraine is in America's best interest. But to fully understand why the party has changed its tune, we need to look beyond the walls of Congress. We need to look at the base of the Republican Party, because their views have evolved too, shaped not by those in political power, but rather by the voices of right-wing commentators and podcasters. Podcasters like Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, and Tim Pool have garnered massive followings, with the hosts who initially voiced strong support for Ukraine's resistance to Russia now reevaluating their positions. This transformation isn't subtle. These influencers have amplified a growing sense of skepticism towards continued military and financial support for Ukraine, driven largely by what they perceive as a failure to seek a quick resolution to the war and the heavy toll it has taken on U.S. taxpayers. While we might be able to take guesses as to why certain conservative figures have shifted their support away from Ukraine and towards ending the war on Russia's terms, there's one podcaster whose change in opinion we understand with absolute clarity, Tim Pool. Tim Pool, once seen as a centrist voice in American political discourse, has undergone a dramatic transformation in his stance on Ukraine. In the early days of Russia's invasion, Pool expressed support for Ukraine's fight for sovereignty, emphasizing the need to resist Russian aggression and maintain democratic values. But something has changed, drastically. By 2024, Pool was vocal about his belief that Ukraine was, quote, one of the greatest enemies of our nation, end quote. He has distanced himself from his earlier reporting on Ukraine, stemming all the way back to 2014 when he worked with Vice Media. During that time, Pool covered the Ukrainian Revolution, highlighting the fact that the protests were a grassroots movement from real Ukrainians who wanted to align themselves more with NATO and less with Russia. Fast forwarding to 2024, he now suggests that the U.S. should stop sending aid to Ukraine and focus on ending the conflict on Russia's terms. What triggered this shift? Well, it's not just a sudden change of heart. It's a matter of money, influence, and a far more complicated web of connection. Tim Pool's transformation in opinion on the Ukraine can be directly tied to his involvement with Tenet Media, a company linked to the Russian state media. In 2024, U.S. federal prosecutors indicted 2 employees of RT, the Russian state-controlled media network, for secretly funding Tenet Media with millions of dollars. This company has a clear agenda: produce content that aligns with Russian interests and that includes promoting anti-U.S. and anti-Ukraine messaging.
Seen it for several years. There are people who are deliberately or knowingly or unknowingly promoting Russian propaganda. Of course, one of the great ironies about this is not really an irony. It's just cynicism, and it's just unfortunately un-American. These are the same people that get out, a lot of them that get out and talk about the Russian hoax. Oh, it's a Russian. Oh, there's no. Come on, what are you talking about? There's no connection between, this and Russia. And Russia's not trying to do, but always apologizing for Russia.
Pool, who had been a part of this media ecosystem, claimed that he was unaware of Tenet Media's ties to Russian funding. But as more details emerged, it became clear that the content he was producing during this time increasingly echoed Russian narratives, particularly when it came to Ukraine. Pool's rhetoric on his podcast mirrored key talking points that have long been used by pro-Kremlin influencers, casting the Ukraine as a corrupt state and the U.S. as meddling in foreign conflicts for no good reason. By 2024, Tim Pool wasn't just questioning the amount of aid sent to Ukraine. He was outright suggesting that the U.S. should apologize to Russia, framing the entire war as a mistake that the West had provoked.
This is psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong. I know you've got criminal elements of the U.S. government pushing them and guiding them and telling them what to do. Ukraine is now accused, a German warrant issued for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, triggering this conflict. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world. We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
His claim that, quote, the Ukraine is the enemy of this country was not just a political shift. It was an alignment with a narrative that plays directly into Russian hands, promoting the idea that the West, not Russia, is the aggressor in the situation. In contrast to the growing skepticism from conservative podcasters, Ukraine's President Zelensky continues to make an emotional appeal for support from the West. He has argued that the survival of the Ukraine, and by extension, the preservation of democratic values, is at stake.
Your money is not charity. It's an investment in the global security and democracy that we handle in the most responsible way. It is in your power, really, to help us bring to justice everyone who started this unprovoked and criminal war.
However, as support within conservative media and political circles wanes, Zelensky's pleas are met with an increasingly hostile reception from a faction of U.S. lawmakers and conservative influencers, trickling down to their base. Growing skepticism towards Ukraine's cause is altering the U.S.'s role on the global stage. If the right-wing base, fueled by podcasters and influencers, continues to reject further aid to Ukraine, it could not only limit U.S. support for Ukraine, but significantly affect U.S. foreign policy for years to come. This shift from support to opposition reflects a broader ideological pivot within the Republican Party. As the Ukraine continues to fight for its survival, the U.S.'s role in the conflict is increasingly uncertain. The shift in conservative opinion, fueled by a growing chorus of podcasters and lawmakers, is changing the dynamics of U.S. foreign policy. Whether the U.S. will continue to be a steadfast ally of Ukraine or whether it will retreat into isolationism remains one of the most pressing questions of our time. What we do know, though, is that Russia is rooting for us to retreat from our defense of democracy worldwide.